We have an active investigation. We want to maintain the integrity of that investigation.
Mr. Nikko Jenkins was an indiscriminate killer who wreaked havoc on the Omaha area since being released from prison on July 30th. He crossed racial, gender, and city boundaries to commit his murders. It is rare to have a killer cross racial and gender lines, so law enforcement knew we had an exceptionally violent offender.
He's not pretending to be crazy, he's real life crazy. That Apophis gives him orders. It was this voice that came and was just like, if you do what I tell you to do, if you follow my demands, then I'll make sure you're safe and make sure you're okay.
You wouldn't want to mess with Nikko and be on his bad list, I'll tell you right now.
That's not part of the is he competent or is he not, but it resonates pretty clearly in the evaluation that this is a man that has, over his lifetime, manipulated others, deceived others, abused others, and has taken satisfaction in doing that. It seemed, based on the report provided, these symptoms came up when he needed them and disappeared when he didn't.
Jenkins has since mutilated his face, tongue, and penis and attempted to hang himself at least twice. He also swallowed a set of keys.
The defendant's commission of these 4 murders over a 10-day period is one of the worst killing sprees in the history of this state. Each one of these murders was a deliberate and planned act. The victims were pre-selected and the murders were purposeful. Therefore, this panel finds the death penalty is appropriate, should be, and is hereby given for each of the 4 murders by the defendant. It is therefore the sentence of this court as follows.
Soviet resurrection. Russia, get Kevin.
So white F-150. We got 2 parties inside the vehicle. Appear to be shot in the head. And can you send a squad to our location?
Nikko Jenkins, an infamous criminal known for committing 4 brutal murders in Omaha, Nebraska, within 11 days of his release from prison in 2013. His life and actions have made him a notorious figure in the true crime genre, often labeled as one of the most dangerous and evil individuals in America. Jenkins's criminal record is extensive, with over 20 convictions spanning 2 decades for crimes including murder, aggravated assault, armed robbery, arson, and use of a deadly weapon. His upbringing was marked by instability and trauma, growing up in a family with a long history of criminal behavior. From a young age, he exhibited severe psychological issues and engaged in violent and criminal activities. After being released early from a 21-year prison sentence, where he spent most of his time in solitary confinement, Jenkins went on a killing spree that terrified the Omaha community. His actions and the subsequent investigation revealed a deeply troubled individual influenced by severe mental health issues, including claims of being directed by the Egyptian serpent god Apophis. Nikko Jenkins's case highlights systemic failures in the criminal justice system, particularly regarding mental health treatment and the handling of individuals with severe psychological disorders. His story is a tragic example of how untreated mental illness and a lack of support can lead to catastrophic outcomes. Jenkins is currently on death row, sentenced to death plus 450 years, with his appeals having been denied by the U.S. Supreme Court. In just 11 days, 4 brutal murders rocked Omaha, Nebraska, and a judge would ultimately hold Nikko Jenkins responsible for all of them. Released from prison early, after serving only half his sentence, Jenkins's name has become synonymous with the darkest corners of the true crime genre. Search his name online, and you'll find labels like the evilest man in America, the most dangerous man on earth, natural-born killer, and psychopath. Over 2 decades, Jenkins accumulated more than 20 convictions for crimes. Nikko Jenkins is a figure of pure terror, unpredictable and violent both in and out of prison. His notoriety is such that even a psychiatric hospital once refused to admit him. Street legend has it that he once killed a man simply for looking at him. In 2013, mere weeks after his release from prison, Jenkins embarked on a ruthless killing spree that left a trail of fear and bloodshed in Nebraska. The nature of the murders captured national attention, both for their brutality and their apparent randomness. Even more shocking was Jenkins's behavior after being apprehended. This documentary delves into the case of Nikko Jenkins, presenting the facts and leaving it to you, the viewer, to decide what they mean. Our aim is not to vilify or dignify Jenkins, but to examine the circumstances that led to such a horrific series of events. What can be learned from this case? Is there a way to prevent such atrocities in the future? Nikko Jenkins's story begins with his deeply troubled family. Born on September 16, 1986, in Colorado, Nikko Jenkins's early life was marked by instability and trauma. He witnessed and experienced significant violence, verbal abuse, and substance abuse within his family. His father, diagnosed with bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, was an alcoholic who abandoned the family when Nikko was 7. This tumultuous environment had severe effects on young Nikko, who was placed in foster care at age 7 and first psychiatrically hospitalized at age 8. Psychiatric evaluations revealed a deeply troubled child. Diagnosed with bipolar disorder, schizoaffective disorder, and other mental illnesses, Jenkins was deemed a danger to himself and others from a young age. By the time he was 11, he was involved in gang activities and carrying weapons. His juvenile record included theft, arson, and weapon charges. Expelled from numerous schools, he eventually dropped out entirely by 7th grade. His background is marked by a long line of convicted felons. Nikko's uncle, Warren Levering, is a felon who has fathered 7 children with 6 different women across 5 states. His mother, Lori Jenkins, herself a convicted felon, was recently out on bond for terroristic threats. Of their 6 kids, 4 have been arrested. Erica Jenkins, Nikko's sister, is a convicted felon, as is their sister Melanie. The family tree is a web of criminal behavior and dysfunction, contributing to the chaotic environment in which Nikko was raised. By 13, Jenkins had a substance abuse problem and had lived in multiple state-ordered out-of-home placements. Despite these interventions, he continued down a path of escalating criminal behavior. In 2002, Jenkins carjacked and robbed 2 people at gunpoint. Convicted for these armed robberies at 17, he was sentenced to 18 years, which later increased to 21 years due to further infractions. In prison, Jenkins spent the majority of his time in solitary confinement due to behavioral problems. Solitary confinement exacerbated his mental health issues, leading to hallucinations and delusions. Upon his release in 2013, after serving just half his sentence, Jenkins was not under parole supervision and received no mental health treatment or re-entry support. Nikko Jenkins's release was followed by a spree of brutal murders. On August 11, 2013, police found the bodies of Jorge Cajiga Ruiz and Juan Uribe Peña, their pockets turned out and killed with a shotgun loaded with deer slugs. A week later, Jenkins killed his former cellmate Curtis Bradford, and 3 days after that, he murdered Andrea Kruger to steal her vehicle. The community was terrorized by these random, senseless killings. A full-scale investigation by local and federal authorities led to Jenkins's arrest on August 30, 2013, after he threatened to kill a woman and her family. Evidence including surveillance footage, ballistics, and DNA linked Jenkins to the murders. During his interrogation, Jenkins claimed he was driven by the voice of the Egyptian serpent god Apophis, who commanded him to kill.
Bloody killer. That's what's gonna happen. You don't realize I got Nikko Jenkins? You don't realize that? I got Nikko Jenkins. I got you. I got your DNA at the murder scene. I got your DNA in the car. I got the weapon. I got Nikko Jenkins. I don't need to make... I don't care about it. I just want other people who are involved in it. What the hell happened out there? Alright, you know, I know who. I know what. I know when. I know where. And then when I talked to you earlier, you were saying stuff about a carjacking. That woman's husband and children. That woman's husband is grieving right now. This is not just some psycho killer that just wanted to go trophy. I am documenting psychiatrically disorder. This is a fact. This family didn't deserve this. This could have been prevented had it not been for the Nebraska Department of Corrections doing what they knew what they supposed to have did. They never gave me an opportunity for treatment because I wouldn't take the medicine.
Jenkins's trial was marked by conflicting psychiatric evaluations. Some experts diagnosed him with severe mental illness, while others believed he was faking his symptoms. Despite his bizarre behavior, including self-mutilation and threats against officials, Jenkins was found competent to stand trial. On April 16, 2014, he pleaded no contest and was found guilty of all charges. Nikko Jenkins was sentenced to death plus 450 years. Despite multiple appeals, the U.S. Supreme Court refused to hear his case in April 2020. His story remains a chilling example of how systemic failures and deep-seated psychological issues can combine to create a perfect storm of violence and terror. He also was a victim of substantial physical and verbal abuse from his parents, sisters, uncles, and cousins. According to a court-ordered evaluation of Nikko, his family life lacked the structure and social and emotional nourishment a child needs. In his youth, Nikko was evaluated by Dr. Jane Dahlk, a psychiatrist, who reported that he was suicidal and a danger to his mother and sister. He was hearing voices, carrying on conversations with himself, reported audio and visual hallucinations, and suffered difficulty sleeping and bedwetting. Dr. Dahlk testified that he had bipolar disorder at age 8. 6 psychiatrists unanimously agreed that Nikko experienced years of serious mental illness. The most common diagnosis was schizoaffective disorder, bipolar type. Government clinicians, however, reached different diagnoses, but agreed that Nikko had serious mental disorders. Additionally, Nikko had been incarcerated in the Douglas County Juvenile Detention Center multiple times in his teenage years. Finally, in 2002, after years of detention, he was returned to society, but without the benefit of a re-entry program or mental health treatment plan for his transition back into the community. With minimal education, a poor employment outlook, untreated behavioral health problems, and a lack of supportive family structure, the prospects of a successful adjustment to society were slim at best. So perhaps it's no wonder that on June 24, 2002, Nikko returned to familiar habits and carjacked and robbed a 21-year-old man at gunpoint. 2 months later, he carjacked a 20-year-old woman at gunpoint at a grocery store. In 2003, at 17, Nikko was convicted for the armed robberies and sentenced to 18 years in prison, which would later grow to 21 years. By July 2005, he was placed in solitary confinement intermittently due to behavioral problems. He was alone in a cell for 23 hours per day and separated from most normal human contact. He received no meaningful health treatment while in solitary. At the time of his release in 2013, he had spent 77% of his time in isolation. What does extensive solitary confinement do to the human psyche? Dr. Craig Haney told a June 19th Senate Judiciary Subcommittee on Human Rights that the conditions of confinement are far too severe to serve any kind of penological purpose. Dr. Haney had interviewed hundreds of prison staff and inmates and toured and inspected dozens of U.S. prisons. At the hearing, he showed pictures of solitary confinement's harsh conditions, including filthy cells that are scarcely larger than a king-size bed. For some prisoners, the endless monotony and lack of human contact precipitate a descent into madness. Also, the American Psychological Association states many inmates experience panic attacks, depression, and paranoia, and some suffer hallucinations. In addition, patients with existing mental illness see their mental illness exacerbated. According to the National Alliance on Mental Illness, the long-term effect of solitary confinement is devastating. It can leave mentally ill individuals unable to function in correctional facilities and unprepared to successfully re-enter communities after release.
The internal affairs investigation on Douglas County Sheriff's and Omaha Police Department have been filed, and those law enforcement agencies need to file those investigations to those tangible physical evidence of the law enforcement officers.
When Nikko was not in isolation, he was wreaking havoc. He reportedly had a substantial history of verbalizing threats of violence against others. On August 25, 2008, a unit manager reported on 2 conversations with Nikko. Apparently, he spoke with Nikko on July 22nd, and at that time, Nikko said, "I'm just gonna randomly go to suburban houses and start killing people outside of North Omaha. Maybe go to Tecumseh or Syracuse with my gang members and start killing people." There are multiple reports of Nikko making similar threats. Despite the homicidal thoughts, Nikko was discharged from the Nebraska correctional system on July 30, 2013, after serving just 10.5 of the 21-year sentence. Remarkably, he was released to the community straight from solitary confinement. Because he was discharged and not paroled, Nikko was not under parole supervision, or any other kind of special monitoring. His wife at the time, Shalonda Jenkins, claimed in an interview that she urged the parole board against letting him out as he was not ready to be in society. He's not pretending to be crazy, he's real-life crazy. And prior to his July release from prison, Nikko asked for mental help. His wife did, too. I told them not to let him out. I said, he's not ready to come out in society. Nikko's wife says, the system failed him by not giving him that treatment. Police also find a deer slug, consistent with the deer slug used at the earlier homicides. On August 21, 2013, Andrea Kruger had just completed a bartending shift at the Deja Vu Lounge when surveillance footage showed her locking up at 1:47 a.m. She was driving home at approximately 2 a.m. when another vehicle stopped her car. The driver got out of his vehicle, walked up to Andrea's driver's side door, opened it, and forcibly pulled her out. He immediately shot her multiple times. The assailant jumped into her car and took off. 4 murders in 10 days. The crime's brutal, senseless, and seemingly random nature terrified the community. Who was the perpetrator, and who will be next? Authorities launched a full-scale investigation that involved the Douglas County Sheriff's Office, the Omaha Police Department, the FBI, and the U.S. Marshals. On Monday, August 30th, a woman at the Tudor Apartments in Omaha called 911, stating that Nikko Jenkins threatened to kill her and her family. Nikko was located and arrested on a terroristic threats charge. Police observed Nikko carrying a bag into an apartment and obtained a search warrant for that bag. It contained a Remington Model Express Magnum Pump 12-gauge shotgun with a cut barrel and a buttstock, and a Hi-Point Carbine Model 995 rifle. Shell casings recovered from the Kruger murder scene were determined to have been fired by the same Hi-Point carbine. It also had Bradford's DNA on it. Ballistics evidence revealed that the spent rifle slug from the Bradford crime scene was fired from the shotgun recovered from the bag. On September 3rd, they brought Nikko in for questioning. By then, they had acquired substantial evidence against him, including an image of a female on surveillance footage, purchasing the kind of unique ammunition used in the killings. Police also obtained video from local businesses, which placed Nikko and his uncle in the area around the time of Kruger's murder. Additional corroboration came from Nikko's cousin who was present at the first and last murders, and one of Nikko's sisters, concerning Bradford's murder. With this in mind, the interrogation begins. Nikko stated that he heard the voice of the ancient Egyptian serpent god before the crimes. He said, "The last thing I could remember was I'm in a car. The next thing I know, I'm in front of this truck and I'm in front of these individuals. It wasn't premeditated. The demonic force led me to them just like the other victims. I don't recall in the moment of shooting them." When asked if he remembered killing Bradford, Nikko said that he remembered being with Bradford and hearing Apophis. Concerning Andrea Kruger's murder, Nikko recalled seeing a vehicle pull up behind him, hearing Apophis again, and getting out of his car. An investigation revealed that the first 2 victims, Cahiga Ruiz and Uribe Peña, were lured by Jenkins' sister and cousin under the premise of performing a sex act. Then, Nikko appeared and blasted each victim in the face with a shotgun loaded with a deer slug. Finally, the victims were robbed. Next, 22-year-old Curtis Bradford was recruited by Nikko to assist in a robbery, but it was a ruse. First, Nikko's sister shot him once in the head, and then Nikko grabbed his shotgun and said, "This is how you do it," and proceeded to shoot Bradford in the head with a deer slug. Lastly, Nikko confessed that he killed Andrea Kruger because he wanted her vehicle to rob or jack other people. Her body was discovered by police responding to a call for shots fired. In 2013, Nikko sent handwritten letters to the Omaha World Herald newspaper, prosecutors, and a judge, in which he claimed he wished to plead guilty to all counts. He added that he would protect Apophis's kingdom with animalistic, savage brutality. Nikko Jenkins was held without bond, pending trial. Considering the facts of the case, the court wished to determine his competency. On November 8th, Dr. Bruce Gutnick completed a psychiatric diagnostic competence assessment. Dr. Gutnick surmised that Nikko suffered from schizophrenia, continuous, severe. Dr. Gutnick, who evaluated Jenkins on 4 occasions over several years, noted that Nikko had hallucinations and delusions and a blunted affect. Dr. Gutnick could not rule out schizoaffective or other specified personality disorder. Doctors said that Nikko was not competent to stand trial, but that his competence is restorable with appropriate treatment, including psychotropic medications. Based on Dr. Gutnick's assessment, the court ordered that Nikko be evaluated for competence to stand trial by staff at the Lincoln Regional Center. In February 2014, the court held a competency hearing. Psychiatrist Dr. Scott Moore contradicted Dr. Gutnick's assessment and said that Nikko was competent for trial. He believed that Nikko's principal diagnosis was antisocial personality disorder with a very slim likelihood of his having any other psychotic illness, and that Nikko was malingering. Once all the information was accounted for, Nikko was found by the court to be competent to stand trial. But Nikko Jenkins was on a mission to prove otherwise. While in prison, Nikko's behavior grew from eccentric to bizarre to outright dangerous. He mailed a razor to a Nebraska senator. Then, he swallowed a set of 6 prison keys. Next, he mutilated his genitalia in an attempt to make it look like a snake and did enough damage to require 27 stitches. He also used the razor to split his tongue to look like a serpent, but ended up splashing blood on the cell walls. He then tried to carve out the numbers 666 on his forehead, but forgot he was looking into a mirror and ended up carving 999 instead. Lastly, he would frequently cut into his face with razor blades. These constant efforts to prove his incompetency ultimately failed. Nikko would undergo a series of mental evaluations which produced conflicting information. On April 16, 2014, Nikko waived his right to a jury trial, pleaded no contest, and was found guilty of all charges. Nikko Jenkins was sentenced to death plus 450 years. He filed several appeals, but on April 20, 2020, the United States Supreme Court refused to hear his case.
At case CR 13-2768, count 1, murder in the first degree, a class 1 felony, death. Count 2, use of a deadly weapon, firearm to commit a felony, a class 1C felony, 45 to 50 years to run consecutive to all murder convictions at counts 1, 4, 7, and 10. Possession of a deadly weapon by a prohibited person, class 1D felony, 45 to 50 years to run consecutive to all murder convictions.
In 2018, Nikko attempted suicide in prison by slashing his own throat, and he did so again in 2019 by pulling tiles off the wall and sharpening them.
Defendant's commission of these 4 murders over a 10-day period is one of the worst killing sprees in the history of this state. Each one of these murders was a deliberate and planned act. The victims were pre-selected and the murders were purposeful. Therefore, this panel finds the death penalty is appropriate, should be, and is hereby given for each of the 4 murders by the defendant. It is therefore the sentence of this court as follows.
Preventing cases like that of Nikko Jenkins requires a multifaceted approach involving reforms in the criminal justice system, mental health services, and community support systems. Here are several strategies that authorities can implement to prevent such tragedies. Provide continuous mental health support and monitoring for individuals released from prison, particularly those with a history of severe mental illness. Restrict the use of solitary confinement to cases where it is absolutely necessary and for the shortest duration possible. Regularly monitor the mental health of inmates in solitary confinement and provide interventions when needed. Develop alternative disciplinary measures that do not involve long-term isolation. Strengthen parole and probation systems to ensure that individuals are monitored and supported as they reintegrate into society. Foster collaboration between law enforcement, mental health professionals, social services, and community organizations to create a holistic approach to prevention. Implement systems for sharing information about individuals with a history of mental illness and criminal behavior between agencies to ensure coordinated care and intervention. Ensure that the investigation into the crimes is thorough, fair, and impartial. Avoid unnecessary delays in the legal process to prevent prolonging the suffering of the victims' families. Provide a fair trial for the accused, ensuring that justice is not only done but also seen to be done. This includes competent legal representation for both the prosecution and the defense. By combining these approaches, justice can be served in a way that not only addresses the legal aspects of the crime but also supports the emotional and practical needs of the victims' families.